Hermit Mode is either helping you move forwards or holding you back depending upon what you need at this stage of your healing journey. And of course, it's very difficult to decide our sense of direction when we're fundamentally oriented inwards, which is of course a very natural stage in the inner work process. Ultimately, we have a very complex yet very simple question to ask ourselves. Is it wiser to retreat into a self-sheltering healing bubble, to crawl into the cave as it were, or should we maybe take a break from retreating too deep into our private world and instead prioritize healing connections with friends, family, and all the relationships that we need to feel healthy and embedded in a community? It's a complex question which gets even more complex, and I haven't got the answer for you, but the conversation itself is truly important because it gets even more sticky if you're a creative person. Because the creative person has a pattern, usually speaking, if they're a musician, an artist, a painter, or a poet, or even a dancer, where they will internally process difficult emotions and then externally perform into the outer world. How many songs have you heard about heartbreak or the angst towards betrayal, right? This is the pattern. And this is exactly the pattern that Geraldine has identified, who is the asker of today's inner work question. Let me bring this up for you. Geraldine is interesting because she has this very high-level awareness of what it means to heal, but also be a creative. So let me read the question for you. She asked, is it possible to make decent headway with inner trauma work alongside being actively and prolifically engaged in performing and sharing one's creative offerings? Or is it wise to take a serious break to go properly inwards, particularly if one has identified shadow patterns of exhibitionism or using creative work as a coping mechanism or auto-regulation tool? Geraldine, thank you for the question. A bit of context here. Geraldine's a musician, but this also applies for a poet, a dancer, or even someone that just has more of a creative, introspective personality. I've thought a lot about how to answer this question, and I've tried to simplify it down into what I believe to be the two main concepts that are important in the healing hermit phase. The concept of the healing performance and an understanding of your temperament. We'll start with the healing performance concept. The healing performance concept is the idea that healing becomes complete once it is performed. And that doesn't mean a theatrical, persona-based stage show. That means the performance of something which you know to be internally true. You could substitute it to expression, the healing expression. This is the very healthy, very illuminating process of sharing with friends, loved ones, and maybe people that you teach and lead what you've learned on your journey so far. However, that's talking about the endpoint, not the process. Healing performance at its very core is that feeling of healingly performing while still bleeding just a little bit. This is the artist who shows up on the stage and you can tell that they are fresh out of a breakup and it's not just a scene on the stage. This is the healing coach or therapeutic professional who you can tell is going through some things and may not have it all together in the way that they would like, but they're still performing into the world and giving the identity of, hey, I'm right here with you, I'm processing my own shit, I'm not above you on a pedestal. And this is a tricky conversation, because the fundamental question is, what does a healing performance do for both yourself and the other person? Because we need to understand that temperament to understand the context of a performance and when it might actually be limiting the growth that we could experience. Roughly speaking, there's going to be two general directions that you're going to identify with, and of course they will change depending on the challenge and depending on the season. The one direction or the one way of engaging with the healing hermit mode is the preference to go inwards and process in private and in silence. This is the person who comes out of the breakup and by and large wants to be left alone to cry, to vent, to rage, to bubble, to foam, to froth, to destroy and to rebuild. They want to be left alone in the cave. They don't want to be affected because they're experiencing so much inside. That's one way. The other way, roughly speaking, is the person who naturally leans on friends and family. This is the man or woman who comes out of the breakup and within 2 minutes is on the phone to their best friend and goes into the 5-hour conversation. They're the person that cannot help themselves from going into community when things get tough. Of course, it's not just two temperaments. It's not the case of you're either A or B, but it's your preference. For example, me personally, I'll actually have a 2-stage process. I'll tend to be hermity, isolated, go away world, I want to be in silence, until a point where I'm not so chaotic, I'm not so messy, and I'm a bit more put together so that I don't trauma dump onto my friends and loved ones who I know have their own energetic challenges, as we all do, and I wouldn't want to burden them with a sense of completely unprocessed emotion. Doesn't mean that I'm not willing to be messy, but the awareness that I like practicing is how much of this is my shit, how much of this can I healthily, within reason, process on my own, and where could I use some support? For other people, it will be the exact inverse. They will have a conversation with, let's say, their best friend, and it's a 3-hour conversation where they get new perspectives and they have a few accountability practices or even just a good verbal hug. And then from that place, they feel safe enough to go inwards and truly enter into the hermit phase of healing and licking their own wounds back to full health. Where does this concept apply in regards to, do I share with the world or do I keep it to myself? Well, if you know your temperament, you have a pretty good idea of what is the most healing for you. And if you know what's the most healing for you, lean into that. If you need silence, and if you know in your heart that you're caught in a pattern where you tend to partially digest a trauma or a difficult experience, and you turn it into a creative expression where it then becomes beautified and artistically inspired, rather than the raw, messy, unprocessed, unfiltered, not complete sentences, sometimes just cathartic movements themselves, you might be missing an opportunity. How do you know if you're bypassing your own healing when you're a creative performer? Sometimes you can't know, and that's the real scary issue. It's not like a terror, like a ghoul in the night that's going to jump out from underneath your bed, but it's the series of missed opportunities which I wouldn't want for you. If you're in a pattern where you process the pain through a song with a drum beat and some nice melodic chords, and then you put it out 3 weeks later to your friends and family, or maybe even a large audience. There's very popular singer-songwriters out there who you can tell are doing this process. And it's rewarded, because we like to connect emotionally with people who are experiencing similar emotions to those that we're experiencing. That's why the #1 songs on the radio are about love and heartbreak. It's one of the core human experiences. But how many of those singer-songwriters are actually bypassing their trauma healing because they're not willing to sit alone in silence for a longer period of time? I don't know. I haven't got a judgment either way because it depends upon temperament. The healing performance isn't good or bad, but it is a performance. And the level of consciousness that you apply to your performance is going to probably be wedded to the level of healing that you experience and the level of healing energy that you can give to those who are touched by your emotion. Let me go into that. You're probably seeing that in this series, on this channel, I'll bring up stories of my own personal healing journey, but I won't use them in a way where you feel like I'm trauma dumping onto you, but I'm actually sharing something which is, by and large, pretty processed, and I bring it forwards as a teaching opportunity, or a relating opportunity, or maybe just a moment that I feel inspired to share on that very video. But rarely are you going to feel like I'm processing in real time. It's not me vomiting up my trauma and asking you to deal with it. What an awful situation for me to be in as someone who's doing this kind of role publicly. But why do that privately? That's something that really is missed quite often because there's a dichotomy here of, yes, it's wonderful to open up. Fantastic, especially men, opening up emotionally and with vulnerability to an appropriate conversational partner, or ideally a professional therapeutic support. But when is it inappropriate? You'll be the judge of that. It's something that I spoke about in a previous video about how to be a normal person. Appropriate context, appropriate conversations, appropriate intensity. How do you know if you should take a break? How do you know if you should go inwards and truly process in silence? Let me take a drink. Ultimately, I think it's listening to your soul. It's realizing that neither the external nor internal oriented approach are going to be complete on their own. The healing process is a spiral between the opposites, and in the same way that I like to lean this way, spend time on my own, and then at certain points I go and speak to friends and loved ones, that's the same for every single person who's processing pain. There will very rarely be a true hermit or a true socialite, because we're always engaged in both versions of expression. Unless you are watching this from a mountain cabin and you haven't seen anybody for the last 2 years, which is maybe actually one person of however many thousands might see this. If this is you, then that's quite a life and I hope you're well. Everyone else, that's not relevant. We don't need to go full hermit mode because full hermit mode does not exist in this society. It's something which I spoke about in the previous video to this one on the spiritual lone wolf, where we came to the conclusion that ultimately you are fully dependent upon the society that you define yourself in rejection of. The lone wolf, which takes the grandiose position on the podium, forgets that the podium was built by at least a dozen different people, if not hundreds, if not thousands. The hermit mode can't exist in the 21st century because we are truly connected to other people, and it's only through institutions such as governments and emergency services and different supermarket chains even and transport networks and big companies, love them or hate them, that we can have this conversation that we're having right now in this moment, because I would not be able to produce everything around me that helps me to project this into your space, into your room, and you wouldn't be able to receive me unless we were supported, and that's not really hermit mode. Symbolically speaking, from an archetypal perspective or maybe a Jungian perspective, you might be drawing upon the hermit archetype, which is, I think it's number 5 in tarot. It's number 5? Maybe. I don't know my tarot inside and out. But the hermit mode archetype is fundamentally everything that you think it is, but it better be honored at the highest level. There's a difference between being weird and being alone and fucking around honestly on your phone and calling that hermit mode, and actually having a devoted reverential experience which is truly engaging with your healing process. I'd much rather that you spend 6 months going full hermit mode, which may mean celibacy, it might mean limitations. It's not even hermit mode, is it? It's contextual hermit mode. It's a bit more hermity than most people would live, or maybe a lot more hermity, but you're still dependent upon society and you don't grandiosely pretend that you're completely excluded. But if you're going to do it, have the healing intention. Properly devote yourself to the work. Read for 2, 3, or 4 hours a day. Journal every day. Meditate every day. Find the therapeutic professionals that you need to give you the unlocks even quicker than you could find them for yourself. Spend time in nature. Spend time working out. Cut out the drink. Cut out the drugs. Cut out the toxic patterns. Honor the sanctity of the hermit's cave. And when you want to leave, which you are free to do, you can go back out into the world and have a 1-hour coffee chat conversation with a friend on a wonderful winter's evening and share a few of your lessons and feel connected with other humans without needing to exclusively be back in that lonely cave, which maybe you've put the fairy lights up and the nice incense candles and it's actually quite nice in there. But at a certain point it becomes too lonely. And that's when you've gone into dysfunction, in the same way that the person who goes into the comment section and indiscriminately trauma dumps an entire essay of their pain hasn't got the social context, calibration, to realize that that might not be an appropriate move, because unfortunately they're in so much pain that they are literally blinded to the connections that they're apparently trying to seek. This isn't to get on anyone's case in particular, but you'll see it on my videos in the comment section and any therapeutic style video on the internet where there is an indiscriminate sharing, which is actually quite a messy attempt at connection, because there really probably hasn't been enough of the hermit mode to begin with. It's always a dance. It's always a balance. What do I say to you, Geraldine, in regards to how long to take that pause, or should you even take the pause? It's up to you. Some people that I've worked with find that they can do everything in the outer world. They can maintain their job. They can have a really wonderful relationship, and a few hours a day over multiple years, that's what they need. For other people, it might mean a 3, 6, 9-month, or even 12-month period of being 85, 90% oriented towards the cave-like sensation. It's up to you. I don't know your path. I don't know your temperament. I just want you to decide properly and obviously really consider in what ways might you be bypassing the depth because of that potentially compulsive, I'm not saying it is compulsive, but a potentially compulsive desire to externalize a bit too quickly, to externalize too quickly. Don't need to expand on that. That's a fundamental question. The healing performance is neither good nor bad. Hermit mode is neither good nor bad. Your season will shift you between different preferences depending on the topic, and if we want to take it to the highest level, if you're working on a breakup, addiction issues, bodily issues, maybe a body image issue or a fitness issue, a health issue, in addition to trying to build a career or an artistic pathway, the truly awakened, consciously tuned in person will actually experience hermit mode or social mode depending upon the situation that they're focusing on. The relationship breakup might be dealt with in private. The career element might be a public element where you talk with all your friends. The addiction might also be something where you go to group meetings, or perhaps that's also private. And of course, you're always weaving the spider's web, or the pendulum, the web, the webby pendulum, the thread of the pendulum between the two sides, depending upon the day, the problem, the season, and also your mood. You get to do both. You don't have to choose. You don't have to romantically isolate yourself because you're healing your trauma, but you should also be wary of who you speak to and when silence might be a virtue. I'll leave it there. Next video in the series, it's a very unrelated topic, but it's definitely quite a spicy one. I'll see you over there.